Hi everyone, my name is Marcus Beck. I am the program scientist for the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. And today I want to talk to you about the Piney Point Environmental Monitoring Dashboard. This is something that we've created over the last few months in response to changing conditions in and around Piney Point. We are working with many of our partners to collect these data, and we wanted to present this dashboard as a way to synthesize this information and to understand changes around Piney Point relative to the long-term monitoring record we have for Tampa Bay. There are two main tabs on this dashboard. There's current data up top, and then there's baseline data to the right of that. So these are going to be your two main tabs you'll be using to access the data. On this front page, you'll see an overview of what the dashboard is about, a map showing all of the locations where our partners have collected data around Piney Point, and then some tally summaries on the bottom here that is a running tally of all the information we've got to date. So how many agencies are collecting this information, how many parameters are being monitored, how many days of sampling there's been, how many sites we have of data, and how many measurements are currently available. And so these update continuously as we add information to the dashboard. Under the Current Data tab, you'll see 5 options that shows data that has been collected since Piney Point has been discharging wastewater. The first tab you'll see is Water Quality Results, and this is going to be where you go to look at observations that have been collected in and around Piney Point since the beginning of April. The first thing you'll notice is you have an option to select a variable. You can use this drop-down menu to select one of many parameters that have been monitored around Piney Point. Here I'm showing ammonium, and when you do select a variable, you'll get a map showing all the locations with those data, and a table that shows a tabular summary of that information as well. There are a couple of options you can use to view this information. Perhaps one thing that might be useful is you can actually remove stations on land near Piney Point that might skew some of the results you're looking at. These are going to be stations that are going to be at or near outfall areas directly near the phosphogypsum stacks around here. And these typically have really high concentrations, and so if we want to assess the potential impact in the bay, we might want to look at just the bay results here. And so you can hit that switch and remove those stations. And notice that the points are then sized relatively based on only the points you see in the bay itself. You can also select different date ranges. From this slider up here, you see the start and end of days where we have data currently. And you can shift those values down to a particular window. Say we want to look at just 1 week of data. Here we're looking at the first week. We can move this up another week to look at the data that's collected after that, and so on and so forth. Here we'll see the progress one day at a time as the data has been collected. On the map, you'll see that the points are colored and sized according to the relative values. This is a really important tool to assess the changes that may have occurred with the water quality as a result of the discharge. What is also really useful is the ability to show results that are outside of the normal range. And you can click this switch here to emphasize those points. Here I've clicked that switch, and now we see on the map that points that are outside of the normal range are now only circled in black, whereas those that are in the normal range are no longer circled in black. You can also see those same points emphasized on the table here as a darker shading. Now, how we determined the normal range is based on the long-term record of water quality data that we have in the bay. We basically took 15 years of data and took the long-term average between March and April for the sites nearest the stations that were collected around Piney Point and compared those values to the current observations. And so values that are above those ranges or below those ranges are then emphasized. Another interesting feature is the ability to click on an individual point and get a time series of the values that were observed over time at that location. So here I'm clicking Piney 9. This is a long-term DEP monitoring site. If you click that, You see a time series of chlorophyll concentrations from beginning of April to present, where we have the most recent point at that location. And you'll see that normal range that I just talked about emphasized in this purple rectangle here. So early on in the record, we saw fairly high chlorophyll concentrations in response to the discharge around Piney Point, and more recently those chlorophyll concentrations have returned more to baseline levels. The next tab is the algal surveys. These show data that were collected in and around Piney Point, looking at the species of phytoplankton that were observed immediately after and during the discharge event. So there are two ways to view the data on this tab. The first is to click a station on the map. Here now, station CR1 is clicked, and you'll get a bar plot showing the relative counts of the different species that were observed and the date when it was collected, as well as the corresponding water quality data at that station if water quality data was available at that location. There are two types of stations, ones with quantitative data, so stations that actually have cell counts for the different taxa, and others that are just qualitative information that indicate which species were observed as a presence-absence measurement. And you can see the points color-coded by those different descriptions. The other way to view the data is by selecting the taxa from a menu, and this is useful for viewing which species were observed at different locations in the bay. So here from this drop-down menu, I've selected that option, and then you see a different menu here that shows different species you can select. So if I pick Bacillariophyta, we can see all of the locations over time where those were observed. And for both of these options, you can use a date slider to choose the range of dates that you want to observe. So here again, I'm showing early in the record. I can shift that, middle of the record, and then finally later in the record. The next tab shows seagrass and macroalgae results. These are data that are collected at transects along the shoreline to evaluate potential impacts of water quality changes on seagrasses and macroalgae. And so just like the other tabs, you can view the results here by clicking on individual stations. And each time you click on a station, you'll see results for those stations for the dates where we have information at those sites. So when you click on a station, the plots you see show the SAV, or submerged aquatic vegetation species that were observed, as well as the macroalgae groups that were observed at the same sites. The plots show the different dates where the seagrasses and macroalgae were surveyed, as well as different locations and meters along the transect where they were sampled. These plots are good for assessing potential changes over time for different SAV species and macroalgae in response to changing water quality conditions. These plots can also be filtered by different species or macroalgae groups. So if you go to the top, you can select a different species or particular species, hit backspace and remove that from the plot, and you'll see the plot update accordingly. And then you can also put it back in. The next tab shows contaminants. These are mostly metals that were collected by Department of Environmental Protection at many of the long-term monitoring sites where water quality has also been observed. So this layout is very similar to the water quality page. You can view results on a map in a table by selecting a particular variable from the menu. And you can also filter results by different dates, remove survey stations that are on land, and also emphasize values that are out of normal range. Now the only difference here with the water quality page is that the normal ranges are based on regulatory thresholds if they apply for a particular contaminant. You'll see that threshold here on the text if you filter the results by those thresholds. And then lastly, for the current data, we have benthic surveys. This page shows a map where data have been collected, but we don't have results for benthic or sediment samples yet. Those are being processed. We expect those results to be online later this year. Now the third tab group shows baseline data. There are two tabs here showing our long-term record of water quality in seagrasses. This is information we use to assess how the potential changes in response to Piney Point discharges vary relative to the long-term record that we have. This tab shows the water quality data from Hillsborough County and Manatee County. You can select a station on a map by clicking on a location, and you'll see the plots on the right update as you select that map. These plots on the right show total phosphorus, total nitrogen, ammonium, chlorophyll, pH, and salinity. You can zoom in on the plot or click a point on the plot to view the actual value. In addition to showing the complete time series, we can look at March and April values only as a relative comparison to conditions at Piney Point right now. The last baseline tab is the Seagrasses tab. This is very similar to the Seagrasses tab under the current data, except we show seagrass values for our long-term record at some of the transects near Piney Point. As before, you can click on a station to see the values of the different species that were collected at the site over time and along different places along the transect. These plots on the right show the results for the long-term record for the transect you've selected. This plot on the top shows the long-term record of the seagrasses that were collected each year where we have data available. So we have the year on the y-axis, and then on the x-axis we have the point along the transected meters where a species was observed. So each point shows a species. You can see the name of the species with the mouse over, as well as in the legend and where it was collected along the transect. The bottom plot is similar to the first plot, except we see frequency occurrence changes over time along a transect. So now we have year on the x-axis and the relative abundances of the different species on the y-axis. From this plot, we can see how the different species have changed over time and use those values as a baseline comparison to how seagrasses may be responding to discharge at Piney Point right now. So that's basically the monitoring dashboard. We hope this video was informative for you as you navigate this information and understand how the environment may have changed in response to Piney Point. This dashboard is also constantly evolving as we get feedback from our partners, as well as data essentially on a daily basis. So do expect the dashboard to change over time, but most of the main functionality is already built in. Again, my name is Marcus Beck. I am the program scientist for the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. You can contact us and find us on tpep.org, as well as links to many of our other data visualization products. Thank you so much for your time.